As disturbing as Enron's own misconduct is the growing evidence that leading U.S. financial institutions not only took part in Enron's deceptive practices, but at times designed, advanced, and profited from them.
The Enron fraud is the story of synergistic corruption. There are supposed to be checks and balances in the system. The lawyers are supposed to say no. The accountants are supposed to say no. The bankers are supposed to say no, but no one who was supposed to say no said no. They all took their share of the money from the fraud and put it in their pockets.
Enron paid its advisors well. In 2001, the accounting firm Arthur Andersen received $1 million a week. Enron's law firm, Vinson and Elkins, did nearly as well.
Everyone had their hand out at the table. They were all being paid, and as long as Enron continued, they received their fees. They were a part of the process. So it's hard now to say, oh, we didn't know anything.
Had we known then what we know now about Enron's practices, we would not have engaged in these transactions with Enron.
The facts that we now have come to light about Enron, however, were not known at the time.
I believe that the Citigroup professionals involved with these transactions acted in good faith.
I'd like you here to look at one Citi email, Exhibit 333I.
The email trail here is all too lurid. Oh, for instance, one email I remember where the banker writes, Enron loves these deals. They produce cash, but they don't have to show the debt on the balance sheet. Now, a high school student can figure out that the banks were all knowing participants in this wrongdoing.
Merrill Lynch assisted Enron in cooking its books by pretending to purchase an existing Enron asset when it was really engaged in a loan. The accounting sham involved the sale of an interest in 3 Nigerian barges.
Nigeria is a long way from Manhattan, yet for some reason toward the end of the fourth quarter in 1999, Merrill Lynch suddenly decided to buy 3 Nigerian power barges from Enron.
Nigerian power barges have nothing to do with Merrill Lynch's business. It was a blatantly illegal transaction. It was just taking the barges, getting them off Enron's books, having Merrill Lynch, if you will, warehouse them for 5 months, and then buying them back.
Mr. Martin, you've testified here today that there was no guarantee, and you said that under oath. Here's a document saying that the head of your whole division here was going to confirm that understanding.
The same accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, also did the books for Consolidated Freightways, my former company. I found a lot of the fraud. We had DC-8s falling out of the sky, Emery Pilots did. The parent company, CNF Incorporated, owns a lot of companies underneath of it. One of them was Consolidated Freightways. The accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, cooked the books. I found the evidence, brought it in front of the bankruptcy judge, received a lift to stay to go to federal court, and substituted attorney in, and he sabotaged the case. Working with the fraud on the court of the adversary law firm Latham and Watkins, who used a fraudulent law for personal injury, indicating it was a 1 year when the legislators had changed it for 2. Had to go to the Ninth Circuit, explain all the corruption from, at that point, 5 law firms who sold out the interests of myself and others on their fraud charges and the personal injury. Went back to the bankruptcy judge and informed him at that time that $500 million was settled for the Emery Pilots because of the union busting, where the DC-8s had fallen out of the sky and almost 300 people were almost killed at an auction yard after one of the planes crashed. All the managers working for Consolidated Freightways lost their pension, so ERISA comes in and gives the managers some money So instead of $4,000 a month, after 30 years of dedication to the company, they received something around like 11 to $1,500 a month. And that's it. Because it's only 10 cents on the dollar in bankruptcy on the Chapter 11. They simply reorganize and go under another name and continue to operate. And the Teamsters Union provided absolutely no good lawyers, attorneys. They would not stop this corruption. I tried on my own and failed to be able to stop it as well. And even with the substantial amount of evidence, it's really not all that difficult to tear into it once you start looking into a corrupt company. They, on the internet, you can Google and really start to tap into the corruption. It was exactly like Enron. The same banks, Citibank, Merrill Lynch, First Boston, all of those behind Enron were behind Consolidated Freightways, working for the parent company, CNF Incorporated, that is still in operating now. RICO violations, fairly simple to prove. You have to prove 2 precatory offenses. One would be fraudulent conveyance, selling property within a year of declaring bankruptcy. They sold all of our property, leased it out to the non-union company Conway, and moved our trucking company to Mexico and Canada, which is against the Constitution too. Anything that impedes interstate commerce is against the Constitution, and the Constitution goes into bankruptcy. Forefathers were quite brilliant in realizing the power and destruction of corporate America. The Attorney General is supposed to intervene in the bankruptcy. The judge is supposed to, the bankruptcy judge in Riverside, California, is supposed to write a letter to the Attorney General. He comes in, he should come in, and get a forensic auditor to help investigate the cooking of the books. The bankruptcy judge would not do this. See, a lot of the judges basically don't know the laws. There's too many laws, and even when you give them the basic law of fraud and you give him the evidence, he simply looks the other way. In fact, he got very upset, even though he admitted all the corruption. And so this is the unfortunate situation that we have. You know, to tear into the IRS is not necessarily the solution. We have laws. One good law, even with the IRS, is if you want to be tax exempt, you cannot donate to campaign donations for your influence and whatnot. The problem is the laws are not being enforced, they're not being implemented, and the lawyers of this country don't even know fundamental law. I was with a lot of world-class lawyers. They tried to convince me that since the company didn't have workers' comp when I was in the sleeper berth and my coworker launched us over the side of the cliff, that my bounce workers' comp checks, I was just out of luck. But the fact is I could have leaned against the estate, and there's a employer's liability insurance, which is the truck insurance that comes into play. But none of the lawyers in the state of California seem to know this law. And I even had to go outside the state, and they didn't know this simple law I had found on the internet. And then it would be dollar to dollar, it wouldn't be the 10 cents. Then the legislators come in and say, well, we're going to put in the non-dischargeable. They can hire unfit people out of jail and drunks, and if they crash, and even if you have all this evidence of airplanes falling out of the sky and trucks crashing all over the place, well, that's unfortunate. And so that's the problem we have. The donations from these big corporations, which were donating to both parties, and a lot of it was going to this evil Bush administration. And without the check and balances, they tear into the Constitution, and that's where the devastation has taken place. And the banks were wrong for loaning money to these corrupt companies